Good morning. Thank you so much for staying tuned to Kenya's Choice on this 8th day of August 2022. Like I told you earlier on, it's exactly 5 years since the country went back to a general election in 2017, and they're just counting slightly over 23 hours before polls open. I want to take you through some numbers here that you may want to think about. This is the election in numbers. We know that there are 22.1 million registered voters across 46,229 polling stations, some of them in this country, some of them outside the country. As of information that we have from IBC is that 1,290 polling stations do not have the 3G or 4G connectivity, and this is necessary for the transmission of results and especially for the presidential election results. And then to counter that, there were some satellite modems to the tune of 1,144. This is information that came in June 2022. We'll be checking whether there's an update now. And then when it comes to matters of voter distribution, we know that in the 47 counties, you have 22.10 million registered voters. In Kenyan prisons, there are 7,413 voters, and in the diaspora, there are 10,443, and that gives you a total of 22.12 million registered voters. Now, there is deployment required to the tune of 500,000 personnel. This is an estimate, and of course, we know that from the Inspector General of Police, that is Hilary Mutyambai, there are some 150,000 security personnel that are required to manage or to man these elections. 2 officers per polling station, and you know that you have 46,000 polling stations. You can do the math. And of course, personnel at tallying centers are also required. That is, security personnel at tallying centers are also required. And then officials. These are at the polling stations. You have a presiding officer, deputy presiding officer. There are clerks at the polling stations that make up the number of 500,000. I want to go to the next one, and this is you may be wondering, how come you have 150,000 police officers? Do you have enough? So some of them will come from the National Police Service, others will come from the prison service officers. The Kenya Wildlife Service, the Kenya Forest Service, the National Youth Service officers will also be very useful in this election. As of the specific numbers, we do not know that yet. Then this is how the diaspora voting will be happening. In Africa, there are some polling stations in parts of Tanzania, Dar es Salaam and Dodoma, I believe. Then there is Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and South Africa. So those are some 6 countries in Africa. In Europe, you have Germany and United Kingdom. And then in Asia, you have Qatar, United Arab Emirates, that is UAE. In North America, you have Canada, United States of America, that is USA, that you have some polling going on. So the polls will be opening at 6 a.m. tomorrow up until 5 p.m. And I'll get back here with more. But first, I want to introduce our panelists here in studio that are here to help us have this discussion. Let me begin with Commissioner Irene Masit. She's a commissioner with the IEBC, has been there since September last year. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
We also have Ambassador Koki Muli Grinyo, and she has over 32 years of experience managing elections or observing elections and, of course, matters governance. Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for making time for us. She was here last night. Then you have Marcus Agenga from Elections Observation Group. He is the Senior Programs Officer. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
And Bobby Mkangi, you may know him from the making of the Constitution. So he's also constitutional lawyer, but also human rights. Good morning.
Morning to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for making time for us. Let me begin with you, Commissioner Irene Masit. In 23 hours, your commission goes to manage the elections.
Yes.
What are we doing now? How ready are we?
Thank you very much for that question. I want to say with confidence that we are ready with all preparations. As of yesterday, we finished deploying materials to the ground plus personnel. Mm-hmm. Today, most of the personnel will be moving now to the polling stations, starting from the clerks, the security, materials. Materials are at the constituency tallying centers. So today they'll be moving to polling stations. And we hope before midnight, all of them will have arrived. And they'll now prepare their polling station and do what is required of them in preparation of tomorrow's elections.
Very interesting. And I would imagine that 46,000 polling stations, this is quite some work. Talk to us about the enormity of that assignment and how you've ensured that you've got every bit covered.
Yeah, it is. 46,229 are quite very many polling stations. I want to say in each polling station, we'll have 2 police officers inside to guard the polling station. We'll have 4 clerks. 3 will be issuing ballot papers, 2 each. Remember, we have 6 ballot boxes. 1 for president, MP, member of parliament. We have for senator, governor, women rep, and MCA. All those come to 6. So 3 clerks, 2 of them, one of them will be issuing 2 of the ballot papers. One will be checking the biometrics as well as the register as he receives the ID. We'll have also in that polling station a DPO, that is Deputy Presiding Officer, and the Presiding Officer. In the morning, when people reach at the polling station will have been marked within a boundary of 400 meters, whereby people will line up outside the polling station. There'll be a truncated register of voters.
Right.
As they enter in, they'll be told about COVID protocols to ensure that they sanitize, and each of one will enter inside. When a voter enters the polling station, the first thing they have to do is to provide the document they use to register, either an ID, original ID, or a valid Kenyan passport. That is the first clerk who will ensure that they look at those documents.
Okay.
If the person is registered, he'll look at the document first, look at the person. If they appear to look the same, he or she will be asked to put all his fingerprints in the machine. They'll start with the first one. If they cannot identify, they'll go until they exhaust all the 10 fingerprints.
Right.
If the person is found in the KENYA'S kit, his details will pop up.
Okay.
His name, his photo, everything. And he'll be allowed to go now to the next step, where he'll be issued all the 6 ballot papers. Whether he wants to vote for one candidate or 2, he has to be given all the 6.
Right.
After being issued, all those ballot papers will be stamped with IPC stamp behind. And then the last clerk will have folded vertically. Why they do so is to avoid the ink. Maybe if one uses a thumb or writes with a pen with ink, so that ensure that they don't spoil the paper.
Okay.
One will proceed to the folding.
So like if the ballot paper is like this, you stamp it at the back and then?
Fold vertically like that, yes.
Okay.
Yes, not across.
Okay.
Because there are names and boxes on both sides. So the clerk will assist to fold so that when the voter goes to the polling booth, at least he has seen how it's done.
All right, very interesting.
Yes.
But there's something you just mentioned, and sorry, panelists, let me just get this out of the way, that you have to have a valid passport, and we have had cases of people that use the passport to register, but it has since expired maybe the past few days or the past few months. Now that means they cannot vote? They
cannot vote because the law is very clear. It talks of a valid passport. Remember, before we closed the voter registration. We had people to verify. And those who are not found, they were allowed to use ID as an alternative because the ID doesn't expire. So those who have a valid, expired passport will not be able to vote. Okay. It has to be valid at the time of voting.
And are you able to tell from your systems how many would be affected?
Not really, but we did. There was an audit which was done, and those issues were resolved.
Okay.
But now, as the system is, all those who are there are all registered voters. Or unless somebody comes with a copy of ID again, will not be able to vote. Photocopy. Okay. It has to be original ID.
Original ID.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Marcus, because in the election observation group, what have you seen from the preparations that the Commission has done, but also how prepared the country is to get into this tomorrow, 6 a.m.?
Thank you very much. I think from ELOG's point of view, I think the Commission is well prepared for this election, at least technically speaking. They are prepared. We have seen them come out in the open, strategically communicating to the citizens, to the stakeholders, on where they are in terms of the acquisition and distribution of strategic materials. So to that extent, I think the Commission is prepared. One would have wished to see a more elaborate and intensive voter education that the Commission ought to have conducted all throughout the process. Of course, elections is not an event. Of course, it's a cycle. But of course, one wouldn't fault the IBC in terms of because from our observation reports, voter education has been significantly low in this cycle, and one would understand when funding comes late to the Commission, that is significantly then disadvantages the Commission.
Right.
But also, voter education is not an exclusive area only for the Commission, but also other civil society organizations have equally lagged behind in ensuring that the country is well informed. In terms of the citizens, I think the citizens are looking forward to this election. This election is interesting for many of them. Many young people are voting for the first time, so the zeal is out there. Many of front runners in this election have come out to invite their supporters to come and vote. So I think citizens are excited about it. Whether they have the necessary knowledge on how to vote, we will see, but I think they're prepared.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And Ambassador Kokimuli, if you're to focus on the history of elections in this country, and he raises an important point about voter education, but I want to imagine, because we've had a lot of simulations on our different platforms here at Citizen TV, but what is this that we never get right so that we are not able to reach the last voter, should I say the last mile of the voters, in ensuring that they're well informed of their rights, the process, and what they need to know, especially on the roles of each of the 6 elective seats?
Thank you very much, Sam, for having me today, and good morning. I would say, like, voter education and civic education have been very important in creating awareness to voters, especially on the content of why their rights and responsibilities, and also how to actually vote. I know for many years we have had, since 1992, reintroduction of multi-party elections. We had a lot of civil society organizations focusing on voter education and working collaboratively with the Electoral Commission. However, as Mark said, voter education is expensive. Reaching out to all the registered voters throughout the country, and therefore it requires concerted effort. I am aware that the IEBC is statutorily obligated to provide voter education, but also it collaborates with civil society organizations because of the enormity of the work that is required. And it is sad to know that there are fewer and fewer civil society organizations that are receiving sufficient funding from partners and others to be able to provide voter education. I know you've been focusing a lot on the candidates, on the process itself, on the IEBC, but we also need to focus on the voters, because the six ballot papers are very many for any voter. Imagine a voter who is not aware of how to, the step-by-step process. And in this watershed election, it's going to be even more complicated, because when you go to the polling booth, you also get anxious, and people who have been voting for many years still get a little bit nervous, being hit with the realization that this is an important election. It's not as easy as just taking. And it's not just, and therefore, of course, and there are so many little procedures that you have to follow to make sure that you mark the ballot properly. And a lot of times people get a little enthusiastic and tick all across, across the box that is provided, and go even outside. And other voters, because they are not well informed, they think that if you don't like a candidate, you put a cross against that candidate and you put a tick against the one that you like. So sufficient voter education is very important to a voter, to tell a voter that you need to make only one mark inside the box for the person that you prefer as a candidate, and not more than one mark. And therefore, voter education is really critical. And I'm very sad to hear that, because we have seen in the past that spoiled ballots actually amount to quite a substantial number, which is a pity.
Okay, all right, and I think it's also important to add, I don't know if any of you wants to get into that, because there are some voters who think that if there's a voter that there's a candidate you don't like, you cross. If there was one that you like, you take. Maybe you can, Commissioner, you can just clarify on that.
Thank you so much. I want to say this, the way Elok have said, we've had the challenge of funding. But despite that, as a commission, we've been able to do some work around voter education. One is we got funds late, but we've been able to train all the election officials on those areas to show the voter how to mark the ballot. As we speak now, we have 2 voter educators in all the wards, the 1450 wards. It's been ongoing, and we are not going to stop until the election is over. We also been going to media houses, speaking to Kenyans the way I'm doing now, including local radio stations with different dialects. We've done that. As we speak now, even at the Bomas of Kenya, we have call centers with free toll numbers. That is 1543, 1544.
Say that again, 15?
1543 and 1544. We have 150 trained election officials who are receiving calls 24 hours. We started that call center around a week ago. Actually, it's going to 2 weeks, whereby any Kenyan can call. If they are not seeing their name in the register, because we've given them a number to do an SMS. That is where you send your ID, hash to 70,000 and call. If you don't see your details, you call the call center. And quite a number of them have been advised accordingly. Okay. Also, even we've been in the website. We use our Twitter, we use our Facebook, and it is daily to update Kenyans on what we are doing. So I can say to that extent, despite the funding, we have all those people on the ground. The civic educators will go on until after election. Okay. Yeah.
All right. And Wakili, so look, she says that if you have a passport that is not valid, you'll not be in a position to vote in this election. I don't know how that sits with the right to Kenyans, that the work of IBC is to facilitate, not to block. What do you think should happen?
Well, definitely that's the work of IBC, and for that matter, constitutionally and legislatively provided. First, the principle, as you rightly put, that one, we put it in the Constitution, but also IBC, when it is preparing logistically, methodically, process-wise, that it should do so in a way that does not administratively block any Kenyan from enjoying his or her rights, as provided for in particularly Article 38 of the Constitution that facilitates the enjoyment of political rights. So to that extent, and even for other state institutions, and for that matter, Parliament, in coming up with the legislation that now provides the categorical needs of the entire election process, but voting in particular, did examine these principles in terms of what makes it more facilitative, as against balancing it with also what ensures that the election is secure. What confirms that you are a citizen? What confirms that you are registered as a voter? Why is there a need to register beyond somebody just being a citizen? I think these are things that Kenyans have been debating with since we passed the new constitution or promulgated it in 2010. And I think we have come to arrive at the agreement or the consensus that what has been provided as of now, in terms of what the requirements, in terms of certification, in terms of the documentation that a citizen needs to provide during voting, is what is the simplest, most economical and most efficient way of ensuring that every registered voter does participate, but securing the vote to ensure that it is the right people who eventually do participate in the elections, but particularly in voting. So I think in terms of the fact that this is and has been examined by Parliament, and that is why it is legislatively provided for, in terms of in regulations, that has also been appreciated. You find that at the end of the day, you have to reach a threshold, and a threshold that ensures that you have minimal abuse, in as much as you are facilitating as many Kenyans to participate in this, I would say, holy communion of our religion as Kenyans, then we must ensure, and I think IBC and other institutions, as I mentioned, Parliament also included, and Kenyans as a whole, we have come to see that in terms of documentation, there are particular technicalities that we cannot go beyond. We have to remember that we have actually come to a point as Kenyans where we've made it even easier. We recall previously you had to have a voter registration card beyond your ID. Now once you have your identification document, whether it's an ID card or a passport, that you use to register, then you're good to go.
Okay, and I'm just sorry to cut you short, because I'm looking at the Constitution, and it talks about every adult citizen has the right without unreasonable restrictions to be registered as a voter, to vote by secret ballot in any election or referendum, and of course to be a candidate for public office. Then I'm also looking at Section 10 of the Elections Act. It talks about eligibility to vote. A person whose name and biometric data are entered in a register of voters in a particular polling station and who produces an identification document shall be eligible to vote in that polling station. The identification document produced in subsection 1 shall be the identification document used at the time of registration as a voter. Nothing in this section shall entitle a person who is prohibited from voting by any written law to vote or relieve that person from any penalties to which the person may be liable for voting. So I'm reading that and I'm wondering, what is that gives the power to IEBC, and both of you can respond, to say that if your passport is expired, you shouldn't vote?
Well, as I was saying, it's the constitutional premise that in the technicalities, the processes, the mechanics that we do come up with, because the Constitution gives a broad framework to IBC, but also IBC is considered in terms of the particularities that it should look at by Parliament through legislation. And in that sense, it is the people of Kenya that are speaking through their parliamentarians. And as I was saying, this question of documentation, what is needed in terms of identifying a voter, what documents are needed in terms of registering as a voter, is something that, when you look at, we've been examining and considering for a while historically in Kenya. And that's why I think what we have right now is a threshold that we can work with optimally in ensuring that in as much as many Kenyans, as many voters, as many citizens who are viable can register as voters and participate on the particular voting day, but we must also balance it with the security. Because IBC, and through the constitution and legislation, is also supposed to ensure that voting is secure. So in terms of who can come and participate, in terms of the technicalities of what document you produce, what document did you use at the point of registration? Because again, when you look at it, Sam, the issue of the validity, for instance, of a passport is not only germane to voting, it's also germane to the particular use of that passport, that you must have a valid passport at the time you're traveling. So if it is expired, it is not valid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get more into that after the break. Of course, I'm still here with all these panelists. They're here to respond to your questions. If you have any, you can text us your views via 22422 or tweet us at Citizen TV Kenya, at Sam Gituku. The hashtag to use is Kenya's Choice. We're back in a moment.